The year was 1847, and in the deep green heart of Louisiana, the air was so thick you didn't just breathe it, you wore it. It was a world of white lace and black mud, where a woman's good name was the only wall standing between her and the abyss. Isabella Moreau sat on the porch of her father's house, her fingers tracing the spine of a book. She was 19 with eyes the color of the river after a storm, dark, deep, and shifting. She was the daughter of Etienne Moreau, a man who valued his standing in the church above the very soil he walked on. Isabella was different. She liked to read. She liked to walk alone by the Bayou La Fourche, watching the herons. In 1847, a young woman who liked her own company was a woman people watched with suspicion. "Isabella, inside now," her father called. His voice was tight. He had just come from the village, and his face was the color of curdled milk. "What is it, Papa?" she asked, smoothing her apron. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. He had heard the first whisper at the general store. A merchant's son had been found drunk, and to save his own reputation, he had cast a stone at Isabella. He claimed she had met him in the dark. He claimed she was loose. In that moment, the whisper was born. It was a tiny thing, like a spark in dry grass. But by the time the sun set, the fire was already beginning to roar. The church bell rang on Sunday morning, like a hammer hitting an anvil. Isabella walked down the aisle, her head held high, unaware that she was walking into a trap. She felt the eyes before she heard the voices, the way the other women pulled their skirts back as she passed, the way the men looked at her with a new cruel hunger in their eyes. The word promiscuous wasn't spoken aloud, but it hung in the air like the smell of rotting magnolias. Pastor Miller took the pulpit. He didn't say her name, but he spoke of the Jezebel in our midst and the rot of the household. Isabella felt a cold hand wrap around her heart. She looked at her father. Etienne was staring straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped his prayer book. He wasn't thinking about his daughter's innocence. He was thinking about the bank. He was thinking about the neighbors. He was thinking about the shame. After the service, no one spoke to them. The silence was louder than a scream. As they drove the carriage home, the only sound was the rhythmic clack-clack of the horse's hooves. "Papa, tell them it isn't true," Isabella pleaded, her voice trembling. "The village has decided what is true, Isabella," he snapped, "and I will not have my name dragged through the mud for a daughter who cannot keep herself from scandal." The following Tuesday, a man arrived at the Moreau plantation. He rode a horse that looked as mean as he did, a massive, scarred beast. The man was Caleb Rourke. Rourke was a man built of iron and spite. He ran a sugar plantation deep in the swamp, a place where the sun rarely touched the ground. He was known for breaking anything that crossed his path, horses, dogs, and people. Isabella watched from the upstairs window as her father met Rourke at the gate. She saw them exchange a heavy leather pouch. She saw her father sign a piece of parchment, indentured. It was a legal word that meant Isabella was now property. Her father had sold her to save his pride. He had traded his flesh and blood for the quiet of a graveyard. "Pack your things," Etienne said, standing in her doorway 10 minutes later. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Where am I going?" she asked, her voice a ghost of itself. "To work off your shame," he replied. As Rourke's men grabbed her arms, Isabella turned back to the man who had raised her. "Papa, what did I do? Just tell me what I did." Etienne Moreau turned his back. He walked into his study and closed the heavy oak door. The click of the lock was the last thing Isabella heard of her old life. The journey to Rourke's plantation felt like a descent into another world. The trees grew taller, their branches draped in Spanish moss that looked like gray, hanging hair. The air grew colder, even in the Louisiana heat. Rourke didn't speak to her. He treated her like a sack of grain. When they arrived at the gates, rusty iron bars that groaned as they opened, Isabella saw the faces of the people working the fields. They were hollowed out, their eyes reflecting a weariness that went down to the bone. She was taken to a small cabin at the edge of the sugar fields. It was little more than a box of rough-hewn logs. "From now on," Rourke said, leaning down so close she could smell the tobacco on his breath, "you have no name. You are girl. You will wake when the bell rings. You will work until I say stop. You will speak only when I ask a question." He looked at her blue dress, the one she had worn to church. "And you will learn that out here, Reputation doesn't matter. Only the sugar matters. He locked the door from the outside. Isabella sank to the floor, the dirt cold against her skin. She wasn't Isabella Moreau anymore. She was a ghost in the making. Life on the Rourke plantation was a clockwork of cruelty. Rourke didn't use the whip on Isabella at first. He used something far more effective: the impossible rules. Rule 1, do not look at the master. Rule 2, do not speak to the others. Rule 3, the floors must be scrubbed with lye until your fingers bleed. Isabella spent her days on her knees. The lye ate away at her skin, and the heat of the sugar mill made her lungs burn. She was surrounded by people, yet she was utterly alone. One afternoon, while she was hauling a heavy bucket of water, she collapsed. The world spun in circles of green and gold. "Drink this, child," a soft voice whispered. Isabella opened her eyes to see an older woman with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that held the wisdom of a century. This was Henriette. She had been on the plantation for 20 years. She had seen a dozen girls like Isabella come and go. "He's watching," Henriette warned, her voice barely a breath. "Don't let him see you cry. He feeds on tears." Henriette slipped a small piece of sugar cane into Isabella's hand. It was the first act of kindness Isabella had known in months. It was a tiny thing, but it reminded her that she was still a human being. As the months turned into years, Isabella's name began to fade from the world. In the village of Bayou Lafourche, people stopped talking about the promiscuous Moreau girl. It was easier to pretend she had never existed. In the parish records, her name stopped appearing. There were no marriage certificates, no birth announcements, no news. Isabella felt herself disappearing too. She was thinner now, her hands scarred and rough. But inside, something was changing. The fear was being replaced by a cold, hard anger. She watched Rourke. She saw how he treated the enslaved workers. She saw the hidden cellar he went into at night. She began to learn the secrets of the plantation. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew which guards fell asleep after midnight. "He thinks he broke me," she whispered to Henriette one night in the shadows of the mill. "He broke your life, Isabella," Henriette said sadly. "But your soul is a harder thing to crack." Isabella started to plan, not just an escape, but an ending. In 1852, a strange thing happened. A letter arrived at the Moreau household. Etienne Moreau was a broken man by then. The village had moved on, but the silence in his house was a physical weight. He opened the letter with trembling hands. It was written on a scrap of dirty paper. The handwriting was shaky, but he recognized it. It was Isabella's. "I am alive, but not free. He will be punished." Etienne's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a moment of intense hope, followed by a wave of crushing terror. If Isabella came back, the scandal would return. If he went to the police, his own crime, selling his daughter, would be revealed. He looked at the fireplace. The flames danced, orange and hungry. He threw the letter into the fire. He watched the edges curl and turn black. He watched his daughter's voice turn to ash. He told himself he was protecting the family name, but as the smoke rose, he knew he was just protecting a lie. Back on the plantation, Rourke was becoming more paranoid. He had heard rumors of an uprising. He had heard whispers of a girl who was talking to the others, telling them stories of freedom and justice. He called Isabella to the main house. "I heard you've been talking, girl," he said, his eyes narrow. "I have no one to talk to, master," Isabella said, her voice flat and emotionless. Rourke grabbed her by the hair and dragged her toward the kitchen. He pushed aside a heavy rug and opened a trap door. Beneath it was a stone cellar. It was damp, dark, and smelled of old copper and earth. "This is where the disobedient ones go," Rourke growled. He threw her down into the dark. The door slammed shut, and the bolt slid into place. Isabella was alone in the belly of the earth, but as her eyes adjusted to the dark, she realized she wasn't alone. There were chains on the walls. There were names scratched into the stone. She realized then that Rourke didn't just break people. He erased them. Isabella spent 3 days in the cellar. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She listened. She heard the roar of the sugar mill. She heard the shouts of the overseers. And she heard the sound of a secret signal, a low, rhythmic drumming on the floorboards above her. Henriette. On the third night, the door opened. It wasn't Rourke. It was a young boy, one of the workers Isabella had helped when he was sick. He had a key and a torch. "The mill is ready," the boy whispered. Isabella climbed out of the cellar. She didn't run for the gates. She went to the sugar mill. The air inside was thick with the smell of boiling syrup and dry stalks. She saw the others. They were standing in the shadows, their eyes bright with a dangerous light. They had reached their limit. The years of silence and blood had finally reached a boiling point. Isabella took the torch. She looked at the giant wooden beams of the mill. "For all the names he took," she said. She touched the flame to the dry husks of the sugarcane. The fire spread with a terrifying beauty. It raced up the walls like a living thing, devouring the dry wood and the refined sugar. Rourke woke to the sound of the alarm. He ran out onto the porch, his nightshirt flapping in the wind. He saw his empire turning into a pillar of fire. "Get the water!" he screamed. "Save the sugar!" But the workers weren't moving. They stood at the edge of the fields, their faces illuminated by the orange glow. They watched as the fire leaped from the mill to the main house. Rourke realized then that he wasn't in control anymore. He saw a figure standing by the burning mill, a woman in a torn blue dress. Isabella. She wasn't running, she was watching him. The heat was becoming unbearable. The giant stone grinding wheels of the mill, heated by the fire, began to crack and explode. It sounded like cannon fire. Rourke turned to flee into the swamp, but the darkness was waiting for him. By morning, the Rourke plantation was a blackened scar on the landscape. The magnificent house and the towering mill were nothing but piles of smoldering charcoal. The authorities arrived from the parish. They walked through the ruins, their boots crunching on the ash. They expected to find a typical accident. Instead, they found the cellar. When they cleared away the debris, they found the chains. They found the names on the walls, and they found the remains. Beneath the ash of the cellar floor, they discovered the bones of those Rourke had sent north. Among them was a skeleton wrapped in the charred remnants of a blue silk dress. The investigation was short. Rourke was gone, and no one in the parish wanted to dig too deep into the crimes of a man who was now a ghost. They didn't want to explain why a girl from a good family was buried in a slave trader's cellar. They labeled it an accidental plantation fire. They closed the books. They tried to let the silence win again. The news reached Etienne Moreau like a physical blow. When the sheriff told him about the blue dress found in the ruins, Etienne didn't cry. He simply stopped living. He lost the plantation within a year. The reputation he had tried so hard to protect was gone. People didn't whisper about Isabella's promiscuity anymore. They whispered about the father who had sold his daughter to a monster. He became a hermit, living in a small shack near the river. He was haunted by the smell of smoke. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isabella's face as she was led away. In 1861, as the world was tearing itself apart in the Civil War, Etienne Moreau died alone. When the local doctor checked his body, he found a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket. It was a note Etienne had written to himself over and over until the ink ran dry. "I traded my daughter for peace and lost both." He had spent 14 years in a prison of his own making, a cell built of silver and shame. Decades passed. The Civil War ended, and the people who had worked the Rourke plantation were finally free. They didn't forget Isabella. In the small cabins and around the cook fires of the freed families, her name was spoken with reverence. They didn't remember her as a shame girl. They remembered her as a warrior. They told stories of how she had taught the children to read in secret. They told stories of how she had smuggled food to the sick, and they told the truth about the fire. It wasn't no accident, the elders would say to the children. It was the light of justice. Isabella Moreau didn't die in that fire. She was the fire. They said her spirit still walked the Bayou Lafourche, a lady in blue who protected the vulnerable and whispered to those who were being silenced. History books might have forgotten her, but the soil remembered. The river remembered. Today, the backlands of Louisiana are still humid and green. The sugar fields still wave in the wind. If you walk near the ruins of the old plantations, you might feel a sudden chill, a whisper in the Spanish moss. Isabella Moreau's story is a reminder that reputation is a fragile, dangerous thing. It is a reminder that the loudest lies are often built to cover the quietest crimes. We remember the wars and the men who led them, But we must also remember the women like Isabella, the ones who were punished for being beautiful, for being smart, or for simply being in the way. Her voice was buried for 100 years, but it could not be silenced forever. Truth has a way of rising, like smoke from an old fire, until it fills the air and makes everyone see. Isabella was 19 when they took her name. She was 24 when she took her justice, and she is eternal now, a voice for every girl who has ever been told that her reputation is more important than her life. Some crimes are buried in the dirt, but the dirt always eventually gives up its secrets.